What happens when the most powerful country in the world picks a fight with its closest ally and neighbor? Well, we are about to find out because the latest threat coming out of Washington has pushed Canada to do something absolutely unprecedented, something that nobody saw coming, and honestly, something that could reshape the entire economic relationship between these two nations for decades to come. This is not just another political spat. This is a fundamental shift in how Canada sees its future, and the ripple effects are going to be felt by millions of people on both sides of the border. If you want to understand what is really happening and why this matters to you, stay right here because I am going to break it all down. But before we dive in, if you are not already subscribed to this channel, now is the time to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because you do not want to miss what comes next. Now let me take you back to where this all started, because the context here is absolutely crucial to understanding why Canada's response is being called a game changer by political analysts around the world. For months now, former President Donald Trump, who has been ramping up his political activity and influence, has been making increasingly aggressive statements about Canada. But his latest threat took things to an entirely new level. In what can only be described as a stunning escalation, Trump suggested that Canada should become the 51st state of the United States. Now, at first, many people laughed this off as typical Trump rhetoric, the kind of provocative statement he is famous for making to generate headlines and energize his base. But then came the economic threats that showed this was far more serious than political theater. Trump announced plans to impose sweeping 25% tariffs on all Canadian goods entering the United States. Let me put that number into perspective for you, because it is absolutely staggering when you look at the scale of trade between these two countries. The United States and Canada share the largest bilateral trade relationship in the entire world. We are talking about roughly $700 billion in goods and services crossing that border every single year. A 25% tariff on Canadian goods would essentially be like dropping an economic nuclear bomb on the relationship that has defined North American prosperity for generations. But here is where it gets even more interesting. Trump did not stop at general tariffs. He specifically targeted Canadian energy, threatening a 10% tariff on oil and natural gas imports from Canada. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute. Does the United States even need Canadian energy? The answer is absolutely yes, and this is where Trump may have made a critical miscalculation. Canada supplies roughly 60% of all oil imports to the United States. Let me say that again, because I want that number to really sink in. 60%. That is not some marginal supply that can be easily replaced. That is the backbone of American energy consumption, particularly in the northern and Midwestern states where refineries are specifically designed to process the heavier crude oil that comes from the Canadian oil sands. These refineries cannot simply switch to other sources overnight. The infrastructure does not work that way. The specialized equipment, the pipeline connections, the entire supply chain has been built over decades around this Canadian oil flowing south. So when Trump made this threat, something remarkable happened in Ottawa. The Canadian government, which had been trying to maintain diplomatic relations and hoping to negotiate through the crisis, suddenly realized that hoping for the best was no longer a viable strategy. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who had been facing criticism from opposition leaders for being too soft in his response to American pressure, made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the political establishment on both sides of the border. Canada unveiled what officials are calling the most significant pivot in Canadian economic and energy policy in over 50 years. The plan has multiple components, and each one represents a direct challenge to the assumptions that have governed North American relations since before many of us were born. First, Canada announced an accelerated push to diversify its energy exports away from the United States entirely. Now, this might sound like something that would take years to accomplish, but here is the thing. Canada has been quietly building the infrastructure to make this possible. The Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, which was completed in 2024, now gives Canada direct access to Pacific ports where oil can be shipped to hungry markets in Asia. China, India, Japan, South Korea. These countries are desperate for reliable energy supplies, and they are willing to pay premium prices for Canadian crude. The numbers here are remarkable. Asian markets are currently paying between $15 and $20 more per barrel than American refineries. That means Canada could actually make more money selling its oil to Asia than it currently makes selling to the United States. For years, being locked into the American market has actually cost Canada billions of dollars in potential revenue. Trump's threats may have just given Canada the political cover to do what many economists have been saying they should have done years ago. But the energy diversification is just one part of the Canadian response. The second component is what really has people talking, and it involves a tool that Canada has rarely used but has now put directly on the table. Canada announced that it is prepared to restrict energy exports to the United States if tariffs are imposed. Think about what that means. In the middle of winter, with American homes and businesses depending on Canadian natural gas for heat, with refineries depending on Canadian oil to produce gasoline and diesel, Canada is saying it is willing to turn off the tap. Now, some people have criticized this as economic warfare that would hurt Canadians too, and they are not wrong that there would be pain on both sides. But here is the strategic calculation that Ottawa has made. The pain would not be distributed equally. American states that depend on Canadian energy would face immediate supply shortages that could not be solved by simply buying from somewhere else. The pipelines flow north to south. The infrastructure exists to move Canadian energy into the American market, but there is no equivalent infrastructure to quickly bring in replacement supplies from overseas. Meanwhile, Canada can redirect its energy to other markets. It will take time to fully pivot, but the Trans Mountain Pipeline and potential new LNG terminals give Canada options that American border states simply do not have. In a war of economic attrition, Canada is betting that it can outlast the pressure. The third component of Canada's response involves something that rarely gets discussed, but could have enormous implications. Canada has begun reaching out to other American trading partners who have also been targeted by Trump's tariff threats. We are talking about Mexico, the European Union, Japan, and other major economies that are all facing similar pressure from Washington. The idea is to form a coordinated response, essentially a coalition of countries that would present a united front against American trade aggression. This is significant because it fundamentally changes the dynamic. When Trump threatens Canada alone, he is dealing with an economy that is roughly one-tenth the size of the American economy. The power imbalance is obvious. But when Canada coordinates with the European Union, with Japan, with Mexico, and with other trading partners, suddenly the numbers look very different. The combined economic power of a coalition like this would actually exceed that of the United States, and coordinated retaliatory measures could inflict serious damage on American exporters. There are already reports of preliminary discussions happening between Canadian and European officials about exactly this kind of coordination. The European Union has its own history of trade disputes with the Trump administration, and there is significant appetite in Brussels for pushing back against what they see as American unilateralism. But perhaps the most surprising element of Canada's response has been the domestic political transformation it has sparked. For years, Canadian politics has been defined by division between Trudeau's Liberals and Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives. The partisan warfare has been intense, with the two sides seemingly unable to agree on anything. But Trump's threats have done something that seemed impossible just a few months ago. They have unified Canadian political opinion in a way that no domestic issue ever could. Polling conducted in the last few weeks shows that over 80% of Canadians support taking strong retaliatory action against American tariffs. That is not a partisan majority. That is a national consensus that crosses every political, regional, and demographic line you can imagine. Conservative voters who normally oppose Trudeau are standing with the government on this issue. Quebec nationalists who often talk about separating from Canada are now talking about standing together against external threats. Western Canadians who have long complained about being ignored by Ottawa are now the loudest voices calling for using energy as a strategic weapon. This political unity has given the Canadian government something it has not had in years, which is the ability to take bold action without worrying about partisan backlash. When 80% of your population supports a policy direction, you have essentially been given a mandate to do whatever is necessary. And the Canadian government is not wasting this moment. In addition to the energy measures, Canada has announced a comprehensive plan to diversify its economy away from dependence on the American market. This includes new trade negotiations with the United Kingdom, with India, with the growing economies of Southeast Asia. It includes investments in critical minerals that the world needs for electric vehicles and renewable energy technology. Canada has enormous deposits of lithium, cobalt, nickel, and other minerals that are essential for the green energy transition, and right now, most of those resources are processed and consumed domestically or sold to the United States. The new strategy calls for developing these resources for global markets, positioning Canada as an essential supplier to the entire world rather than just to one neighbor. There is also a significant defense and security component to Canada's response that has not gotten as much attention, but is equally important. Trump has repeatedly criticized Canada for not spending enough on defense, and there is some legitimacy to that criticism. Canada has historically spent around 1.4% of its GDP on defense, well below the NATO target of 2%. But rather than simply increasing spending to satisfy American demands, Canada has announced plans to develop more independent defense capabilities, including Arctic sovereignty measures that would reduce reliance on American military assets. This is a subtle but important shift. For decades, Canadian defense policy has essentially assumed that the United States would always be there as an ally and partner. That assumption has now been called into question in a fundamental way. If an American president is openly threatening to absorb Canada as a state and wage economic war against Canadian interests, can Canada really continue to depend on American protection? The answer coming out of Ottawa is increasingly no. And the implications for North American security architecture are profound. Now, I want to be clear about something because I think context matters here. None of this is happening in a vacuum. The global order that has existed since World War II, the system of alliances and trade agreements and international institutions that has governed relations between democratic countries, all of that is being tested right now. Trump's threats against Canada are just one piece of a larger pattern of American retreat from multilateral commitments and a turn toward transactional zero-sum thinking about international relations. Other countries are watching what happens between the United States and Canada very closely. If America can successfully bully its closest ally and neighbor into submission, what does that mean for countries that are further away and have less leverage? Conversely, if Canada successfully stands up to American pressure and emerges with a stronger, more diversified economy, that becomes a model for other countries facing similar threats. The economic stakes are enormous on both sides. American companies that depend on Canadian supply chains are already expressing alarm about the potential disruption. The auto industry is perhaps the most dramatic example. A car assembled in Michigan might cross the border between the United States and Canada 8 times or more during the manufacturing process, with different components being built on different sides of the border. A 25% tariff does not just apply once. It applies every single time that car or its components crosses the border, potentially adding thousands of dollars to the final price of the vehicle. American farmers are also deeply concerned. Canada is the largest export market for American agricultural products, buying more American food than any other country in the world. If Canada retaliates with tariffs on American farm products, and they have explicitly threatened to do exactly that, American farmers who are already struggling with tight margins could face devastating losses. The housing industry is another area of concern. A significant portion of the lumber used in American home construction comes from Canada. Tariffs on Canadian lumber would increase the cost of building homes in the United States at a time when housing affordability is already a major crisis. Estimates suggest that a 25% tariff on Canadian lumber could add between $10,000 and $20,000 to the cost of a new home. In a market where first-time buyers are already struggling to afford anything, that additional cost could push home ownership even further out of reach for millions of Americans. So, what happens next? That is the question everyone is asking, and honestly, nobody knows for certain. What we do know is that Canada has made its position clear. It is not going to back down. It is not going to accept becoming the 51st state. And it is not going to absorb economic punishment without fighting back with every tool at its disposal. The Canadian government has stated publicly that it would prefer to negotiate a fair trade relationship with the United States, one that respects both countries' sovereignty and economic interests. But it has also made clear that it will not negotiate from a position of weakness, and it will not accept terms that are designed to benefit only one side. What we are witnessing right now is a fundamental realignment of one of the most important relationships in the world. The old assumptions that the United States and Canada would always be close allies and partners, that the border between them would always be open for trade and travel, that the two countries would face the world together, all of those assumptions are being questioned in ways they have not been in living memory. The outcome of this confrontation will shape the future of North America for decades to come. It will determine whether the continent remains an integrated economic zone or whether new barriers rise up to divide it. It will determine whether Canada remains focused on its relationship with the United States or whether it truly becomes a global player with diversified partnerships around the world. And it will send a signal to every other country about whether American threats should be feared or whether they can be successfully resisted. For viewers in both countries, this matters in very practical ways. If you are an American who heats your home with natural gas, who fills your car with gasoline refined from Canadian oil, who buys products that contain Canadian components, this trade war could hit your wallet directly. If you are a Canadian who works in an industry that exports to the United States, who travels across the border for business or pleasure, who has family connections on the other side, your life could be significantly disrupted. We are at a turning point, and the decisions made in the coming weeks and months will reverberate for years to come. This is not political entertainment. This is not just another news cycle that will be forgotten next week. This is a genuine restructuring of how two neighboring countries relate to each other, and the stakes could not be higher. I will continue to follow this story and bring you updates as the situation develops. This is one of those moments where paying attention really matters because the world is changing right before our eyes. History is being made, and we have a front row seat. Thank you for watching all the way through. If this video helped you understand what is happening between the United States and Canada, I would really appreciate it if you hit that like button. It helps more people find this content and understand these important issues. Leave a comment below telling me what you think about this situation. Do you think Canada is making the right move by fighting back? Do you think there is a way to resolve this peacefully? I read every single comment and I want to hear your perspective. And if you have not already subscribed to this channel, please do it now. I am committed to bringing you clear, honest analysis of the stories that actually matter. Not clickbait, not sensationalism, just real information that helps you understand our complicated world. Hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I will see you in the next video.